Indy, who's the Director of Strategy for Google Creative Lab. The Creative Lab is it's a small team that looks to rethink the marketing across every kind of media, whether it's currently existing or indeed not yet, with Google as its sole client. Their job is to manage the Google brand, to find new ways to communicate with the company's innovations, intentions and ideals, and do work of which they all feel they can be immensely proud. Prior to that, he was Chief Strategy Officer and founder of Being, which was a technology innovation-led agency at the meeting point between brand communications and service and product design, defining a notion called brand behavior. So we'd like to welcome you, Indy for our final keynote.
I've just had a walk around here, it's amazing, and blown away by the fact they shot Thor out there, which is amazing. I'm a big Thor fan. And thank you for giving me the presentation after the big night before, so I'll try and make it as painless as possible. So yes, I'm Indy Saha, and as Gregory said, I work at a part of Google called Google Creative Lab, and I think if you actually Google Google Creative Lab, you won't find that much about it. So I think it's worthwhile, Gregory's touched on it, but it might be worthwhile talking a little bit about it. With this small team within Google, we're based only in 3 locations. We're based in London, where there's about 30 of us, in New York, where there's maybe about 100, and San Francisco, where there's 15. And we try and rethink communications and product, and Google's our only client. And what we want to try and do through the work that we do is we want to try and remind the world what they love about Google. I cast your mind back to that time that you found your own house on Street View on Google Earth, and that feeling of magic. You thought, whoa, that's really cool. You know, how do you get those moments of warmth again and getting people to understand the role that Google can play in their lives and make them try and see the magic of their products? And the other thing we try and do is we try and invent the future, try and work out what products could try and do, what visions of products could be, how they could make people's lives better and make society better. So we're a very small team. We're writers, designers, filmmakers, coders, artists, strategists, you know, a ragtag bunch of vagabonds. But what we also do is we work collaboratively with partners as well. So should we choose to work with the best coder, we will try and get them in as appropriate for the job, the best illustrator, the best artist. And a lot of our work, which I'll take you through, I'll be able to talk about who we try to collaborate with in that context as well. But just to reassure you, we're not this kind of group of bohemians sitting around playing guitars all day. We actually do tackle serious Google issues. Everything is rooted in something that Google is trying to achieve. And what we try and tackle Google issues by trying to understand how we give creativity and technology a purpose. Now that purpose might be trying to make the world better with the web, or it might be making the web better for the world. And so hopefully you'll see some examples of how we've tried to do that and look at the role that technology and creativity can have to educate, to empower, and to inspire. And we try and do things in kind of an experimental way. If it's already one of the biggest things about being your own agency and your own client at the same time, you've got to, you know, to give yourself a hard time if someone's already beaten you to the idea that you've got working in the tech sector. It's very easy to be obsoleted in a matter of seconds by the next big technology that's coming out. So our role is trying being experimental, try to do things in a way that have never been done before, and also to try and create pilots and prototypes on a small scale which could become much bigger and be applied to the much bigger, broader world of how things could be. So I'm going to talk you through some of our work, and there's an opportunity for questions at the end, which I'm more than happy to field. But I'll set up the challenge that we had at the very start, just to reiterate the idea that we are tackling real Google issues and how we tried to approach it in our experimental way, in our way that tried to make the web better for the world, or the world better with the web in this, by creating pilots and prototypes. So this first thing is this is probably a perception that hopefully has been dispelled, but if you ask someone what is YouTube, most of you will probably go, that's where I go to watch videos of cats on skateboards or cats being flushed down the toilet. It's an absolute waste of time. There's no role for YouTube in my life. So we thought, you know, how can you try and dispel that perception that people have of YouTube in their head. And we thought, well, what if you turn it into a platform for learning? So we teamed up with Stephen Hawking and NASA, and we created this thing called YouTube Space Lab. And what we did was we invited 14 to 18-year-olds from around the world to try and submit what they thought would be a scientific experiment that they would like to see happen in zero gravity out in space on the ISS. And here is the recruitment film we made for it. So, NASA was one of the partners that we chose to team up with on that, and this is one of the winners. This is Amr Mohammed, 18-year-old from Alexandria in Egypt, and his story in itself is pretty heartwarming. By day, he was protesting in Tahrir Square against the Egyptian government. At night, he was coming back, studying for science, and his experiment was the winning one, and his experiment was, how would a predatory spider attack its prey in zero-gravity conditions when it can't pounce? So the spider went up into space and it created its web, and we put prey there and watched and observed how a spider would respond in zero gravity conditions. So that was YouTube Space Lab. This was another really, really important problem. How do you show the evolution of the Chrome browser? I mean, since we all started on the internet, the browser is capable of so many more things than it was ever conceived to do in the first place. We're all streaming video, we're all making phone calls, we're all uploading, downloading media and playing games. And the browser has become pretty powerful, but unfortunately it's a pretty low interest topic. It's not one of those things that keep you awake at night thinking, I wish I had a better browser. You kind of do with your default setting, right, what you've got, because the actual pain involved of downloading your new browser is just not worth that benefit. So we thought, how could we try and demonstrate the power of the Chrome browser in a meaningful way that people might hopefully take notice of? And we thought, what if we use those technologies that are powering the Chrome browser and turn them into a way to inspire the next generation of computer scientists? And so this is the story of Web Lab. I don't know if you guys have heard of Web Lab. It was an exhibition we ran out at the Science Museum between 2012 and 2013. So only finished last year. And where our impetus came from is Eric Schmidt, our then chairman, had been speaking in Edinburgh at the McTaggart lecture bemoaning the state of IT education in schools. And I know certainly if you look at school curricula now, that IT education is something much higher on the agenda. But back then, when it was still a very hot topic, IT education, as you know, was how you use a word processor, how you use PowerPoint, how you use spreadsheets. It wasn't the fundamentals of computer science and engineering. So we thought, what these amazing things that power the Chrome web browser, these invisible, intangible technologies, what if we peeled the layer off, metaphorically, and expose the inner workings of these powers using amazing magic technologies, and somehow made them physical? And what if we made them physical so people could get their hands on them? So that's exactly what we did. We created a set of 5 physical experiments at the Science Museum in London. And so if you didn't have a chance to go, this is the space itself. So if you look at the space, it's right, if you've been to the Science Museum, it's right at the back after you've been through the procession of rocket and fire engines and tractors, right at the back in the big space right at the bottom. This is Web Lab. So as you can see, the 5 experiments are all there, each showcasing a different element from the IT curriculum, and I'll talk through the experiments in a second and what they were. But as you can see, from the very aesthetic point of view, it's got this stripped back, pulling back the layers, revealing the inner workings aesthetics running all the way throughout it. And because underneath we had these kind of yellow wires demonstrating that somehow it was connected to the world outside. But also, very importantly, we wanted WebLab, because we're Google, to be the world's first open and connected exhibition as well. So everything you can do in the physical space, you can actually do on the website itself. And this was the WebLab website, which was just as important. As I show you the experiments that were inside the space itself, you'll be able to see how people were able to replicate exactly the same things inside the space itself and on the website. So here was the film that we made just to talk about the launch of WebLab. So I'll just go through those 5 experiments, those physical exhibits. This is Sketchbot. So as you can see here, you've got these little robots with robotic arms which paint your face in sand and then delete it. The next person comes along and paints their picture in sand. This was quite a popular exhibit. There were massive queues for them. Some of the machines were dedicated just to be for those people who were joining in online. So whether you were in the exhibition space itself or whether you were back home, you could join a virtual queue. And what you could then do is stand in front of your webcam or in front of a camera in the space, have your photograph taken, and the robotic arm would then draw your picture in the sand. And what this was trying to demonstrate is the idea of data translation in a very, very kind of interesting way. The fact that you can take physical, light-based images, light-based data of your picture, translate that into many different forms to physical movements of the robotic arm. That was what Sketchbots was about. So here you go. This is my colleague David, who's having his picture taken. Then his picture gets spliced in many different ways. And it basically talks you through the entire process. You get this shown on screen as well. I won't go in any further detail on that. This next exhibit was called Universal Orchestra. And these were a series of abstracted instruments which sat in the spaces which you could play online. But each instrument was designed to be played by someone in the physical space itself and someone back home on their computer. And the IT curriculum that this was trying to showcase was the whole notion of real-time collaboration. This was a pretty exciting experiment. This was called Data Tracer, and what we wanted to showcase here was the physical structure of the internet as well. The fact that when you look for an image or an object online, the fact that it has to travel many, many miles in a fraction of a second to get to you, and the way that it might do that is It might stop in the middle of its journey, split into two parts, then reunite at a later stage. But to be able to showcase the actual physical journey the data takes to reach you was what we were trying to do. So in the space itself, we create this beautiful geometric 3D relief map made out of corian, and a laser line marked the space where the different images came from whichever part of the world, from whichever server they were located at, to get to you where you were in, whether it's the Science Museum in London or back home on your own computer. And so again, we try to replicate that polygonal design online as well on the website. So again, you'd be able to see the journey that data took to get to you back in your own home as well. This and so the IT concept that Data Trace was trying to show is this concept of trace routing. This is Teleporter. Teleporter is literally something you stick your head into. You lift it up and down. It's very much like a periscope. You put your head in there and you get transported to one of 3 different places, and it's streaming in 3D at all times, so you can literally see what's happening in real time there and then. So we had one in a shark in the middle of right in the middle of a shark tank in Johannesburg, and you're trying to get a broadband connection into the middle of a shark tank in Johannesburg was never an easy experience. We had another one in even the concept of this is brilliant. There's a place in Hamburg in Germany called Miniature World where they've recreated an entire city in miniature form. And so we had another one of the 360 streaming cameras in the middle of the airport in Miniature World. So you could stick your head into this teleporter and you'd see a miniature aircraft zoom past your head. And the final place was a 24-hour bakery in North Carolina, which always had something. And now it sounds a bit odd. We did actually think of having something, and we were going to have a 24-hour streaming camera in Mission Control in Houston, because we'd all kind of seen these films of Apollo 13 where everyone seemed to be constantly high-fiving each other. But that was not actually the case. We looked at some of the footage and it was just people really head down, and it wasn't actually that interesting at all. So instead we went for the 24-hour bakery in Carolina, which actually in contrast was very animated, and there was always something new to watch. And what you could do, whether you were at home or whether you were on your computer, you could take a picture of the scene that you've seen, whether it's a shark swimming at you, a plane coming at you, or someone creating a new Danish pastry in North Carolina. Oh, whoops. Sorry about that. And the final exhibit that we wanted to just talk about, experiment, was lab tags. So as soon as everyone came to the exhibit, or whether you went online, you got one of these cards, which was made up of 3 different polygonal shapes, arranged in very different configurations, and this was your unique identity. And as you went through the exhibit, this unique identity allowed you to save what you'd created. So whether it was a piece of music made on Universal Orchestra, whether it was your picture drawn in sand by a robot, or the images that you'd taken at the Shark Tank, these all allowed you to keep a record of what you did. But very importantly, it was also a really interesting way of finding out different kinds of commonality that you had between the people in the exhibition space itself or in the world outside visiting from online. And it was demonstrated by this thing called the LabTag Connector and Explorer, a giant frieze with a robotic arm. As you can see there, it's drawn a little silhouette already. So for example, if lots of people were logging in from Australia at that moment in time, it would quickly draw a map of Australia, and all the unique identities of people who were from Australia at that moment in time would aggregate around that outline that had just been drawn. If a lot of people were on Universal Orchestra at the same time, all those different identities would come together. And it was again an interesting way of showing the whole role of data organization online as well. So that was WebLab. Unfortunately it's finished now, but it was a huge endeavor, and we thought it was quite interesting. Here's something actually which is on at the moment. Now this was a very real problem that we had. How do we get developers using more of Google's tools and using more of Google's products? And the Google development tools had always been, or any kind of tool to be honest, was always the realm of that guy you stick in the back room with no natural light who sits at his desktop for hours on end, coding servers. We thought, you know what, if you want people using tools or Google tools, well, why not change the nature of those tools themselves? Why don't you talk about the creative potential of those tools itself, and talk about developers as artists as well and their own creative potential. So this is something we created a year in the making based on a prototype developed in Israel. DevArt, art made with code. And what we really wanted to talk about was this idea of reframing coding as a creative discipline, reframing coders as artists in their own right, not these people that, you phone up and they come around and tell you to press Control-Alt-Delete. There is a different kind of, notion of what a developer and a coder is. So DevArt had 3 parts. The first part was an exhibition in did anyone go to the Rain Room in the Barbican? In the Curve Gallery in the Rain Room, that's the space that we use. So as part of the Digital Revolution exhibition, which the Barbican were hosting anyway, we had DevArt as the final part of it, where we commissioned 3 of the world's foremost interactive artists to try and bring to life their artistic skills using code. And this is the space itself. Obviously, there's less rain in here now, and I'll talk about what actually these exhibits were in a second. But a very, very interesting space on until the end of September. And the second part was, if you can imagine, there was one extra space that we wanted to put out to the world. So we'd already commissioned 3 of the world's foremost interactive artists to try and commission a piece of art for DevArt. We used GitHub to try. GitHub, if you're not aware of it, it's like a social network, but for coders and for code as well, where you can have repositories of code which people can then, as they say, fork off and build upon other people's work. And so we use GitHub as the platform to launch the search for the 4th artist, the 4th interactive artist who would be part of the DevArt exhibition as well. And just in the same way that code has changed the way that art is done, or the way that art is at least executed, the new digital world has also changed the way that artists apply their craft as well. It's not locked in a studio anymore. It's open source. It's there for the world to see. It's there for people to try and borrow with pride. So we got our 3 resident interactive artists to open source and show and showcase everything that they were doing, so people could be inspired, take thoughts and inspiration, and also, if they want, borrow some of their code and build off their ideas as well. So in order to launch the search for the 4th commissioned piece of work, here is the launch video that we created. So the first piece of work I want to talk about was done by Zach Lieberman. Zach Lieberman, awesome guy, brilliant guy. His piece of work is called Play the World. So here is Zach playing it himself. Now, Play the World is essentially a giant keyboard which is connected to every radio station in the world. And when you press a note, every radio station in the world that's playing that note, you'll be able to hear. And we've got speakers and little screens orientated around you, so you get a sense of direction of where that sound is coming from. So if you press the note G, you might get a bossa nova radio station from Brazil, you might get a sports radio station from Nigeria, all playing that note. And the idea is it gives you a way to orientate yourself around the world using sound. So that was pretty interesting. I've just included a video of Zach Lieberman talking about his work as well. I won't do it from the other artists, but I think it'd be interesting to try and just get into his head to understand his way of thinking, why he came about with this piece of work.
I'm trying to bring joy to people, make people smile. I'm trying to create strange, unique moments for people. My background is in fine arts, and I study.
Sorry, don't know what happened there. 1 second.
I'm trying to bring joy to people, make people smile. I'm trying to create strange, unique moments for people. My background is in fine arts, and I studied painting and printmaking, and I'd always loved animation. I love this idea of animation as bringing something to life, and this idea that you could write code and breathe life into things, for me, was really fascinating. A lot of the projects that I do involve gesture, involve drawing. What does it mean to make a mark? There's something really kind of fundamentally important with putting a line down on a piece of paper. That's like saying, I'm here. And a lot of what I do is ask those what-if questions. What would it look like for a line to uncurl itself? Then you have to write the software to see that answer. And I think we need a culture of poems. I use the term poetic computation to describe what we do. For me, poetry is the right words in the right order. Code is also the right words in the right order. It is a very economical amount of words and very specific words that tell the computer to do specific things. What's happening a lot now is that we're winding our way into these museums through the back door. The next generation of curators coming up will have grown up learning processing and learning these tools and being part of these communities. And so as we grow up together, we'll be more and more accepted into the art world. A lot of the stuff I do is in code, but when it comes to building stuff, I spend a lot of time looking at materials. Use speakers and components, and sometimes it's really useful just to get ideas. There's data all around us, and one phenomenon is that you jump into a taxi cab and you have no idea what music is going to be playing. It could be talk radio or sports or Senegalese music. My dev art proposal is called Play the World. It's a keyboard where you press a note and it finds that note that's happening live in audio streams from around the world. Always these projects start with a crazy idea. One of my responsibilities is to get myself in trouble, and then the act of making the work is getting yourself out of trouble.
He was such a fascinating guy to work with, and I don't know about you, but I love his beautiful notion of poetic computation. In fact, he actually lectures in poetic computation in New York as well. The next piece of art was by Carsten Schmidt, a German artist based in London, living out of Highgate. His piece of work is called Code Factory, and Code Factory is all about the fact that if the internet and the web in general has democratized access to information, then the new wave of technology is making us all into artists and sculptors, and has democratized the notion of art itself. And so he created this amazing sculpture, and each of the components of that sculpture were generated by the 3D printer at the center of it as well. So it took a very long time, but a piece of art that generated itself is quite an interesting notion. And what you can do is, whether it's from home or from one of these display panels as well, is Carsten using the interface, you can create your own designs. It joins a queue, and then it gets made by the 3D printer. And the show itself is quite amazing. It's transparent and quite and light driven. It's quite an interesting thing to watch as well. And your own creation gets put up on the shelf. So this was at the very start as the creations were coming out, but it's around this idea that anyone can be a sculptor now. The next of our commissioned artists, our final commissioned artists, were actually a duo based out of Barcelona. So Vavara Gulyaleva is actually Estonian, and Marc Canet, he's Catalan, he's from Barcelona, and they work together. And their idea is something called wishing wall. So what you can do is you can speak into a microphone, and your voice is then your words that you've uttered is turned into a cocoon, which then turns into a butterfly. And if you want, it uses hand tracking. You can put your hand out, and the butterfly can land on your hand as well. It's quite amazing when you actually experience it. And the winners of our search for the fourth commissioned artist were a French duo, a duo as well, Beatrice and Cyril, and their work was called The Changes of Mr. Carlier. And what you do in their exhibit is you stand behind a screen and you see this avatar which tracks your body movements, and you're cut off from the whole world, you're lost in your own world, and it mimics you, and you move around, and sometimes it might throw up a little fire which you feel compelled to stamp out with your foot. Birds might fly at you, and you move around, and you have some time just to be able to let go of your inhibitions and dance in the way that you want to, because you're blissfully behind this screen where other people can watch you, but you can't see them watching you, but they just see your avatar moving around. And there's many different incarnations of Mr. Carlier doing many different things in many different storytelling scenarios. So there were the 4 exhibits that are currently in the DevArt exhibition, which is the final part of the digital revolution, the Barbican. So I said there were 3 parts. There were parts 1 and 2. The final part is DevArt Young Creators. So for the first 4 weeks of DevArt itself, we asked each of the artists to host school children between the ages of 9 to 13 every morning for an hour to talk to them about what the basics of their coding was, how they could create their own piece of art through code. So again, getting to this new generation of people who we want to get into understand code, showing them that this thing called code isn't that awful boring thing, it's really this interesting thing that they've created. So here is Vavara and Ma teaching school kids, and we did it across the boroughs of Hackney and Tower. Interesting thing about the borough of Hackney is, even though it's the borough where Tech City is based, it's also got the lowest level of kids going into high level A levels in IT. So there's a bit of an anachronism there. So lots of school children in class size of about 30 every morning for an hour learning about the basics of these building blocks called code that could create these amazing bits of art. So for example, what Vavara and Ma got the kids to do is understand that coding is actually a symptom of 3 variables, for example. So a butterfly can have a variable of color, frequency of flapping, and size. And by changing each of those, you can create your own butterfly, but create your own specific butterfly. And in those kind of small bite-sized pieces, kids were starting to understand the smaller but very important concepts of how to think in a computational way. And what we're also doing over the course of the last week, we've been compiling all the information and knowledge that we've gathered in terms of teaching the children, and we're compiling them into syllabuses to be used in the school IT training curriculum for 9 to 13-year-olds as well. So that's happening as we speak, and I'm reviewing them when I get back. The next problem we just wanted to talk to was how do you demonstrate Google's educational potential? Google you can use in universities and schools, and it's quite an interesting tool to use for many educational purposes. Rather than doing, again, an advertising campaign, we thought, well, what if we used our place in the world as a way of creating a platform for science and technology, a way to inspire science and technology and educational thinking. So we came up with this platform called Google Science Fair, which is a way for kids to put forward their scientific experiments that they'd hopefully want to try and change the world around them in whatever their own modest means were, or whatever their world was. So this was inspired by the year before. We had this young 17-year-old from Florida, Brittany Wenger, who at the age of 17 created a cloud-based neural learning algorithm which detected the incidence of breast cancer to 98% accuracy. She's 17 years old, and that was one of the ideas that came out of it. We had Sakiwe and Bonke here, who are two kids from Swaziland, both aged 14, who realized that by simply using chicken manure as fertilizer, they could increase the yield of crops in their village by 10 times. Okay, so these were two of the interesting stories, two of the interesting winners that emerged at Google Science Fair. We were, however, had this very difficult task of being faced with a competition which had an appeal, but a niche appeal. How do we try and make that appealing to those kids who wouldn't naturally self-identify as scientists, and get more kids putting their ideas for scientific change out in the world? So we came out with this idea of, it's your turn to change the world, but don't forget that some of the most amazing scientists in the world all started on their journey to scientific greatness at a similar time, at the similar ages to you. You know, whether it's Einstein, Graham Bell, or Louis Braille. And you know, that theme was reflected on the website as well. And again, using three of those heroes who start their journeys young, we made this film to try and recruit some more entries. I don't know if this is actually true, but I got an email from some of the guys, some of the engineers in Mountain View, saying, would you mind just taking your campaign down, because our engineers, they're like 34 and they haven't achieved as much as these guys here, and they're feeling slightly demotivated. So I call that a symbol of success, I guess. So, I mean, that campaign was pretty successful, but we faced, for this year, another problem. We got enough kids, 13 or 18-year-old, thinking, you know, I really want to do something. But then they were faced with the tyranny of a blank sheet of paper. Now I'm here. What do I do? How do I have my idea? So the way that we tried to innovate this year was we came up with something called the idea springboard. We found that the anatomy of a great idea from the year before had usually had three components. It had usually been something that they were passionate about, a hobby, a non-academic hobby related to something in their life. There was usually a subject that they were good at, and there was usually something that they wanted to change in the world around them. So we came up with the idea springboard, a simple way for you to input those three different fields in, and what it would do, it would go into Google Search, Google Patents, Google Scholar, YouTube, find the related articles which tried to bring all three of those different components together. So if you liked football and you were good at physics and you wanted to change poverty, it would bring up articles around the trajectory of football or how physics could alleviate hunger, and bring up interesting connections between the data, and this was successful this year in terms of contributing to about a 50% increase in the number of scientific project contributions into the platform. So, final few ideas here. We were bringing out something called the Web Speech API. It sounds incredibly dull, right? But what that is you can literally speak into your browser and it recognizes your voice and it would be able to then turn that into speech. And so we thought, rather than doing a campaign around this, what if we created a game that could help teach people English as a start and then potentially teach them other languages? So we created this thing called Spell Up. And here was the film to launch that.
Imagine building up your English by playing a game using only your voice, where you S-P-E-L-L and pronounce words aloud to stack them up and build a tower. Make it as high as you can to reach new levels by filling in the blanks, guessing mystery words, and solving word jumbles. The higher you go, the more difficult it gets. But if you make an M-I-S-S, earn bonuses and use them to level back up, reach new heights, and unlock achievements. Spell up, speak to play, and build up your English.
So it sounds quite simple to do, but again, when we're talking about the kind of collaborators we would work with, as well as collaborating with some really interesting designers, you can see in that we talk to teachers, we talk to game mechanics experts that understand the incentivization mechanics that keep people involved in games, and so it was quite a complex endeavor underneath the surface. So final thing I'm just going to talk about is as we were launching Google+, there was an interesting thing on Google+ called Hangouts. And I don't know if you guys have had a chance to use Hangouts, but it's a chance for 9 people to speak simultaneously using video chat. And how could we tell people about it? Well, we thought, is there an interesting way of using the mechanic of one person talks and 9 people can interact with it in a way? Is there a metaphor that exists out there which we could use? What about the comedy club? The fact that you can be on stage as a comedian and people can heckle you in the front row, but similarly, you can put them down as well. So we created something called Hangout Comedy Club. And we got together with Comic Relief to create this pilot which allowed them to have some kind of presence beyond just Red Nose Day itself. So what we did was, using the camera, we developed an algorithm, a facial recognition algorithm, which detected whether you were smiling or not. So a smiling algorithm, believe it or not, is constituent of 29 different variables, including distance of top of lip to nose, width of smile, etc., etc., and also based on how much you were laughing as well. And so what we allowed was, based on how much you'd been smiling, there could be a suggested donation to Comic Relief, and to see how your laugh could try and change a life. If you didn't want to sit in the front row, as we called it, directly in the line of fire of these comedians, you could just watch it on YouTube as well, live. So sitting, as we called it, in the back row. And here is the film we did to launch it.
Imagine going to a comedy show from the comfort of your sofa. Introducing Hangout Comedy Club, where Comic Relief brings some of the UK's funniest comedians to you, wherever you might be. You can laugh at, heckle, and maybe even get picked on, all in front of your computer, thanks to Google Plus Hangouts, a clever video calling kind of thing. Just like in a real comedy club, the bravest can interact with the comedians. But don't worry, if that sounds scary, you can sit out of view from the comedian, just having a laugh with your friends. We've also developed a little piece of technology called a laughometer that measures how much you were amused by the show. And by measuring your highs, lows, and lows, we can calculate and suggest in an almost scientific way an optional donation to Comic Relief. But you can give as little or as much as you want. We just want you to have a good laugh, and if your laugh can help change your life, then all the better. Well, that's it. Hope you'll come to some of our shows to laugh and heckle for a good cause.
And we piloted at the Edinburgh Fringe Festival, and we managed to get a pretty sizable audience attending, and we've given that a comic relief now, so they can do with that what they will. And that is all I was just going to share with you today, and there's lots of stuff I'd love to share with you as well, which we've got cooking, but unfortunately I can't. But hopefully that's a selection of work that tries to show how we at Google Creative Lab are trying to use technology and creativity for good. So I am happy to take questions.
Thanks very much, Indy. And I think what's really interesting about it was really fascinating presentation. Really interesting about this association with Google, you know, saying they're to educate, empower, and inspire. And then we saw that series of examples. Knowing you all as I do by now, I'm sure there's any number of questions around that. So who would like to start off? Just here first, and then you at the back.
So I was quite interested.
Just wait for the microphone. I'll be with you in a second.
I was interested in your development of the web browser and whether it was Google policy. It's like they pushed on with the Android platform, which was mostly apps. Why didn't they push with the browser for the tablets and for the phones instead of developing Java platform?
God, unfortunately, that's a really technology-led question. I know that it's an interesting issue that is causing a lot of debate, and I think you're right to talk about it, but I'm not the best to be able to answer that, unfortunately. I know that we believe that there is a role for the Chrome browser and a role for the Android browser.
And just to the back there.
Hello. I can see privacy concerns in most of the projects about the Google Lab, so like biometrics, you know, or being seen from another part of the world, taking pictures of that. How are you dealing with privacy and, for instance, is it that storage?
I think it's a good question. I mean, I can't speak for all of Google, unfortunately, but I can give you one example from an example that we've done, because it's something that we do take very seriously. So, for example, WebLab. If you look at the sand storage, the sand robots, the reason why we did it in sand is we wanted it to be deletable and not leaving a trace. So the idea, that was one of the reasons behind it. You take a picture, that data is there, it then evaporates. So we were very careful not to record any data on that specific thing.
But the data has already traveled. I mean, was there?
Yeah. Yeah, I'm not sure, but I apologize. I can't really answer the intricacies of that question.
And I have another question.
Sorry, there's lots of people with questions, so we'll have to move on. There's a question here. I thought I saw someone with a hand up. Yeah, just here, and then.
I can speak loud. It's being recorded. Oh, it's being recorded. Oh, I see. It's a banal question, really. I just wanted to find out what happened to the spider. That was strange.
You know what? I really don't know. I don't know what happened to the spider.
And just behind there. Yep, that's it. And then Elaine.
Hi, thank you for the presentation. I think all artistic projects you showed are quite demanding from point of view of skills and education of programmers, artists. And I personally know Barbara and Mar, and I know they are technically very good. And Barbara is a doctoral student in Estonia. There are other kind of artistic projects which are more collaborative, where the artist could be a visualizer or who is imagining products and kind of hiring programmers or technicians. And these kind of works were not included in this exhibition. I haven't seen it yet, but I think, what is your opinion concerning this authorship question?
So just to clarify, is the question around, did you feel that these type of work shown in DevArt was too narrow and constrictive, or was it more a question on authorship? What was the...
In that sense, it's quite narrow. And
okay.
Concerning skills and education of artists / programmers. But they're, how to say, artist is not only a person who is technically realizing. He could be technically without any skills, like a film director also. He's not holding camera.
Yeah, I think, you know what, that's a really good question, because I think one of the things we'd done as we were developing this project, and we'd had many backwards and forwards discussions around this, we thought, where this project actually started, if you look at the original DevArt pilot, was in Israel. They paired together a coder and an artist. So it was always a pairing between those two diametric opposites. And as we were thinking through it, we thought, you know what, I think there might be a more interest. It might not be the only story, but I think there could be an interesting story celebrating the fact that they can be the same person. So I think that was the empowering bit, the fact that you don't have to be specialized in your skill, because that pairing thing still constricts the technologist to being a technologist without having that artistic potential. So I think at one level I agree it could be slightly constricted, but we felt it might be more empowering by showing that the technologist and the artist could be the same person and have that shared skill set. Because if you look at the three people that we commissioned, you know, some of them started as coders first and then became artistic. Some of them started off as artists and then learned how to code. But no matter how you got there, there were still these Renaissance polymaths who were able to do both sides of left brain and right brain to create this amazing type of art.
Ghislaine and then Dushan.
Hello, thanks for the input. I was just thinking about Google, obviously is a very big company, yeah, and the aims that you're putting forward very well intended to, you know, inventing the future and dispelling wrong perceptions out there, etc. And I was wondering how much you're able to do, really, of that with the size of the projects you're doing. I mean, I've been to the Barton exhibition, which I've enjoyed, and I enjoyed particularly the puppet piece. My children very enjoyed the new commission. But actually, even within that exhibition, obviously those four pieces are within a context which ranges from the 1950s of artists and coders who became artists and artists who became coders. And this conference is full of people who are well aware of those histories, yeah. But when you do the work, say for example, into Tower Hamlets and Hackney, how much are you really able to do? Like, for example, you know, as a group that also works out into the educational sector, but we're a small SME, what number of classrooms are you reaching with those particular, like getting those issues across about coding and creativity?
I think that's a great question. I think the question you're asking there is we don't want to be making a tree fall in the forest and no one hear about it, right? So I think what we always try and do is, in terms of remit of our group, it's back to this thing of trying to create pilots and prototypes that try and scale. What we try and do is we look at an idea which we can try and imagine a way that technology could be used and then hand it off to a partner who can help it scale. How we scale our pilots and prototypes is something that we think constantly about. So, which is why we're doing the program around young creators to be able to turn it into part of the national curriculum. It doesn't matter actually if only a group of 40 groups of 30 school kids see that program. What impact is it having on the wider world? I mean, I'm from, the north of England, which is probably even more, deprived in that sense. So it makes sense to be able to have something which can scale. And our way of trying to do that, maybe not be the best way, is trying to turn it into part of the curriculum. So that was the intention behind it. But I think it's something that we do look at in everything that we try and do. How to create something which can scale, whether it's through the rest of Google that we can try and influence, or whether it's through a partner who can help us to try and do that.
Okay. Dushan and then Mim, and that will probably be it for today.
Yeah, well, my question is actually a little bit connected to the previous one. I remember the YouTube Space Lab and generally kind of the extended campaigns of YouTube Science Week and things like that. And I remember this being quite effective also from myself. However, I was wondering, like, how do you monitor and evaluate your campaigns? Do you have a team within your team, or is there kind of specific, and what data do you use to well, evaluate the effectiveness of your campaigns?
Yeah, we use it a lot. I think let's use the example that we talked about. I mean, one thing I didn't want to try and do is, you know, show evaluation metrics of these campaigns. You know, WebLab, for example, was seen in every country in the world online, even North Korea. I don't know how that happened, even in North Korea. But I didn't deliberately put those kind of statistics in because it just becomes numbers in the end, and you know, you can blind to numbers. But we do evaluate every campaign. So in Science Fair, we were able to look at the conversion funnel. We were able to look at the number of people coming to the site, how many people fill an entry form, then how many people submitted projects. I mean, that's deliberately simplifying the conversion funnel. But we looked at where the kind of gaps or where the lacks of conversion were, and we solved for it. And the first thing that we saw, we found that not enough people were entering, purely because we saw the number of YouTube views and we saw the number of people coming to the site. Big disparity. How do we close that gap? Hence we came out with a campaign which talked about people who began their scientific journey with the same journey as you. Tick that on year one based on the metrics. Year two, we then found that they weren't able to come up with an idea once they'd registered their interest. There was a gap there. We then dug into why that might have been the case. And, you know, we use very many different metrics, and there might be quant, there might be qual, there might be ethnography, trying to work out what are the root drives to these. But that's all the stuff that sits underneath the tip of the iceberg. What I was just able to show you there was just the top of the iceberg.
And Mim, sorry, this will have to be the last question, I'm afraid. Yeah.
Hi, I was just wondering, so I understand that you run communications for Google in that sense, but do any groups of designers, thinkers, artists come to you, or is it always outward facing where you have a problem or an issue that you want to kind of solve or make the world aware of, and then you ask for collaborations, or does anybody ever kind of go, well, I've got something that would enhance Google or could utilise Google, and then come to you?
So are you talking externally or internally?
No, externally, a group of artists, let's say, working in the East End, rather than you going, I have something that I want to talk and discuss, so therefore I'm going to ask people, and I found this group in the East End.
Yeah.
Do they ever come the other way?
Yes, it happens a lot, actually. It happens a lot. And, some of the designers and artists we use in some of our other projects have been ones that have approached us independently. I think what we always try and do is, our role at Creative Lab is to, promote Google's products and values and ethos and reputation. And so we try and work with them in a way that is complementary and helps us achieve our goals together, rather than how can you use us to achieve our commercial ends. It's always been more of a collaboration, and we always try and reach the same point together. But yeah, we have people, we look at people all the time. I think we've got also a program within Creative Lab called the Google 5, where we get 5 young art students or students with a filmmaking background or a copywriting background or a hacking background to come and work in Creative Lab for 11 months. And it's like an apprenticeship scheme almost as well. So we're very connected with the artistic community.
Good. Well, that's all we've got time for. I'm sure there's many, just based on the numbers of hands, there's any number of people who would have liked to have asked some questions. But that's, I'm afraid, all we've got time for. We'd just like to thank you very much indeed.
Thank you for the opportunity. Thank you.